This is a historical narration, not a record of exact dates, but a story about how systems quietly formed, and why we still live inside them. These episodes are not about kings or empires, but about how authority stopped being temporary and learned how to remain in place. Settlement made authority necessary, but it did not yet make it permanent. In early settled life, leadership still appeared only when needed. Decisions were made to solve immediate problems. Once resolved, authority receded back into the group. This episode begins at the moment that changed. As populations grew and systems stabilized, leadership roles stopped dissolving. Decision-making no longer ended with the moment. Authority remained even when no crisis existed. Power began to stay. Not because people demanded control, but because coordination at scale required continuity. This episode explores how authority shifted from situational influence into lasting power, how leadership detached from circumstance, and how hierarchy entered everyday life. Before centralized power existed, authority remained fluid. In early communities, leadership was tied to situation rather than position. Someone led because they had knowledge, experience, or trust relevant to the moment. When the moment passed, so did their influence. Authority followed need. This flexibility protected balance. No one governed permanently because permanent governance was unnecessary. Decisions were negotiated, influence shifted, leadership was shared, temporary, and personal. This system worked while scale remained limited. Groups were small enough for memory to function socially. Everyone knew who had decided what and why. Reputation mattered because it was visible. Accountability existed through proximity. But flexibility had limits. As settlements expanded, decisions became more frequent and more complex. Resource allocation, storage, defense, and coordination demanded consistency. Renegotiating authority every time slowed action. Repetition changed expectations. People began to look to the same individuals for decisions. Those individuals gained familiarity. Familiarity created trust. Trust encouraged reliance. Reliance created dependence. Gradually, leadership stopped dissolving. It lingered. People deferred even when circumstances did not demand it. Authority became attached to the person rather than the problem. This attachment mattered. Once authority followed individuals instead of situations, power began to accumulate. Decisions connected across time. Influence extended beyond immediate need. Still nothing was formalized. Still nothing was declared permanent, but the conditions were set. Authority was no longer temporary. It was becoming continuous. As communities expanded, pressure on authority intensified. More people meant more decisions. Storage, labor coordination, defense, and dispute resolution all demanded attention. Problems overlapped. Choices affected larger numbers of people for longer periods of time. Situational leadership struggled under this weight. When authority dissolved after each decision, continuity was lost. Agreements had to be re-explained. Prior commitments could be questioned. Memory became fragile as scale increased. Pressure did not emerge from rebellion, it emerged from complexity. The larger the system became, the more costly uncertainty grew. Delays carried consequences. Inconsistent decisions created instability. The community needed outcomes that would last. People began to demand predictability. They wanted to know who decided. They wanted to know where responsibility lay. They wanted assurance that decisions would not shift without warning. This expectation changed the role of authority. Leaders were no longer asked only to respond. They were expected to anticipate. They were expected to maintain continuity. Authority became preventative rather than reactive. Pressure also emerged from inequality. As resources accumulated, differences in access appeared. Some individuals controlled storage, tools, or information. These advantages increased reliance on certain figures. Influence concentrated naturally. Concentration created visibility. People noticed who had power. They noticed who benefited from decisions. They noticed who could enforce outcomes. Once noticed, power invited challenge. To avoid constant conflict, authority needed protection. Decisions had to be defended not just socially, but structurally. Influence needed reinforcement. Pressure demanded permanence. Without it, the system could not hold. To manage pressure, authority became organized. Roles began to separate. Decision-making no longer rested solely on personal influence. Tasks were divided. Responsibility became defined. Some individuals oversaw resources. Others enforced agreements. Others coordinated labor or defense. This division created structure. Once roles existed, they could be repeated. Once repeated, they could be expected. Over time, authority stopped being personal and started becoming institutional. Organization allowed power to persist beyond individuals. Rules were established to guide behavior. Procedures replaced negotiation. Records began to matter because memory alone was insufficient. Organization preserved decisions across time. This changed the nature of leadership. Leaders no longer relied only on trust. They relied on position. Authority became something held rather than borrowed. Influence no longer dissolved when the moment passed. Hierarchy emerged. Some roles carried more authority than others. Decision-making became layered. Appeals followed channels rather than conversations. Power gained shape. This structure reduced conflict by clarifying control. People knew who decided. They knew who enforced. They knew where to turn. Organization stabilized the system, but it also limited flexibility. Choices became constrained by procedure. Change slowed. Innovation required permission. The system favored continuity over adaptation. This trade-off was accepted because stability mattered more than freedom. Organization did not eliminate conflict. It managed it. And once management existed, authority could endure. With organization in place, authority stopped fading. Power became attached to roles rather than people. Even when individuals changed, the position remained. Decisions carried force because of where they came from, not who made them. This is when power became permanent. Authority no longer required constant justification. Its legitimacy came from structure itself. People followed rules because they were rules, not because they agreed with them. Enforcement became routine. Those in authority could compel behavior without renegotiation. Compliance became expected. Resistance became deviation. This changed everyday life. People adjusted behavior in anticipation of authority. Decisions were shaped by what was allowed rather than what was possible. The system governed conduct even when no authority figure was present. Power also gained protection. Challenges to authority were treated as threats to order. Punishment reinforced compliance. Stability became the highest value. Authority was no longer merely functional, it was foundational. Once power took hold, it began to define reality. What was allowed felt normal, what was forbidden felt wrong. Structure shaped perception. This permanence mattered. It allowed societies to scale. It enabled complex coordination. It made long-term projects possible, but it also narrowed choice. Once authority learned how to stay, leaving became difficult. And once power became permanent, it reshaped what it meant to live within a system. Once power remained in place long enough, it began to feel normal. What started as organized authority slowly became expectation. People adjusted behavior not because they were forced in every moment, but because the system taught them what was acceptable. Authority no longer needed constant enforcement, it lived inside routine. This is when power became culture. Culture forms when structure repeats across generations. Children grow up inside rules they did not create. They learn where authority sits by observing daily life. Obedience is taught through imitation rather than instruction. Power stops feeling imposed, it starts feeling natural. Roles harden at this stage. Positions of authority become inherited, formalized, or symbolically protected. Titles replace individuals. The system continues even when leaders change. Power is no longer personal, it is embedded. This embedding changes identity. People begin to define themselves in relation to authority. Status, obligation, and belonging are shaped by proximity to power. To follow rules becomes virtuous. To challenge them becomes dangerous. Tradition reinforces this shift. Practices that once solved practical problems become defended, simply because they exist. Their origins fade. Their continuation feels justified by age alone. Stability becomes proof of correctness. Culture begins to protect power. People enforce norms on one another. Disapproval replaces force. Compliance becomes moral rather than practical. The system polices itself. Memory plays a crucial role. Stories are told about how things have always been done. The past becomes a tool for legitimacy. Continuity is presented as necessity. This makes power resilient. Even when conditions change, authority remains. Adaptation slows. Questioning feels risky. The system values preservation over revision. This is the cost of permanence. Power that once solved coordination now shapes perception. What is allowed feels obvious. What is forbidden feels unthinkable. Structure defines reality. Once culture locks in, power no longer needs to argue for itself. It simply exists. Modern societies are built on this moment. Governments, institutions, laws, and hierarchies all trace back to the decision to make authority permanent. We inherit systems that already know how to stay. We rarely question why power exists. We ask only how it is used. Permanent authority allows scale. It enables coordination across distance and time. It makes stability possible, but it also limits movement. Once power is embedded in culture, leaving becomes difficult. Alternatives feel unrealistic. Change requires permission. This episode is not about ancient rulers. It is about the foundation of modern order. Because when power became permanent, it reshaped how humans live inside systems, and how difficult it is to imagine life without them. This was not the end of leadership, it was the beginning of power that could not leave. And once systems form, they rarely disappear.